In a dark world filled with deceit, one united voice is crying out. Revealing the truth of God's Word. It's time to expose the hidden truth. And unravel the lies. While we're living beyond Satan's little season.
Welcome to Living Beyond Satan's Little Season show. We're your hosts,
Sister Crystal,
Brother Phil. Topic today, who are the sons of God, part 2. Now, I'm not going to go over too much. We'll do a little brief overview of last week. The sons of God in the Bible were actually part of the hosts of heaven.
right?
Essentially, that have been there since sometime before the creation of the world. This is what we learn about before God. Matter of fact, they were involved with even our creation. This is an exciting topic because now we're learning about kind of like the governmental system that God has created. And sometimes we call them angels, and they're called stars at some points because the stars, basically, when they fell from the heavens,
Right.
those stars are basically angels.
Right.
Yeah, many times are fallen angels because the stars come down and they fall down because they've been booted out, essentially.
Right.
You know? So
They lost their place.
they lost their place, in the heavens, right? So there's a host of angelic beings that are called sons of God because they look like us. They can actually intermarry with us, which is had been done in the past. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about their origin story of when they decided, some of them at least, some of the fallen angels kind of decided to kind of go rogue. And this is where the story begins. And there's a passage of scripture in Deuteronomy chapter 32 we're going to read now, where we learn about these fallen sons of God that have gone rogue. And they basically became gods to the nations in the world. And of course, the Bible calls them demons, but I think demons could be like a little bit different entities than the fallen angels, but I think they kind of all fit in the same category here. Some of them are demons, some of them are fallen angels. But we know these angels set themselves up as gods themselves. That was one of their downfalls and why they got judged in the past for their transgression against God.
Yeah. You kind of look at why God tells us to not have pride or jealousy or covetousness, because it's wanting something that doesn't really belong to you or that you probably shouldn't even have. You probably might be happier if you didn't have all those feelings about thinking you're all that and wanting something that really maybe shouldn't belong to you. Because so many people want what someone else has, or in this case, the created beings want what the creator has, and so that could have been out of pride or jealousy or whatever, and that's what caught them into the mess they're in. And why we have to be careful what we give our time and attention to, because we could be falling into that same destruction.
Okay, well, let's go to Deuteronomy. This is very interesting stuff. This is like, this kind of almost like is one of those kind that will change the way you view what's going on in the heavens and what our purpose is here. And so we're going to start in Deuteronomy chapter 32, and we're going to read only 2 verses 8 and 9. And this, Moses explains a little bit about what's kind of going on with the nations and why they all, at the time when Moses was explaining why all the other nations, they're worshiping all these other gods. And so he explains all this here in this verse of scripture. This is very interesting. Okay, go ahead and start with verse 8 in Deuteronomy 32.
When the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, He set the bounds of the nations according to the number of the angels of God.
Okay, so you hear what it said there? God at some point, he divided the nations. Now, we know exactly when that event occurred. Do you have any idea when the dividing of the nations actually occurred? What event in the Bible tells us when God divided the nations, split them all up previous to this? In like an event, perhaps? Anybody have any clues here?
Well, if I had to
Tower
guess, Babel.
of Babel. Yeah. This is when God kind of split up the languages, split off the nations. Because remember that, before when they came out of the ark, they were all kind of unified as one group, and they didn't really move out. But God kind of divided the nations at that point, right? Well, that was the Babel event, right? Well, it says here that he set the nations up according to the number of angels. Now, this is very interesting because now you're learning of his basically angelic council, that different angels apparently got different nations.
Right.
And you kind of learn that a little bit in Daniel, where you have different gods running certain nations.
Right.
This is what you kind of see happening here. Okay. And I think here's what they were kind of doing. They kind of seemed like throughout history, they were kind of vying for power a little bit with each other. Not only with, of course, in the nation of Israel, but with each other. They were kind of vying for power, taking over other people's lands. Oh, my people are going to be bigger, so we're going to have them take over, that kind of stuff. So they become essentially they were trying to set themselves up as, these angels of God were trying to set themselves up as gods running these nations. This is kind of what you see here, the detail you're getting here. Go ahead and read the last verse there.
And his people, Jacob, became the portion of the Lord. Israel was the line of his inheritance.
Okay, so, out of all the nations, God took, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as his inheritance, and left the rest of the nations on the earth to essentially the fallen. They became later on fallen angels. They were the sons of God that were part of God's angelic council. But God kind of expected them to, okay, you need to, teach them the ways of the Lord and all that. But what did they do? We see that they didn't just do that. They did their own thing, and they rebelled against God. And next thing you know, boom, they're doing all kinds of wickedness and evil, teaching the people to do all kinds of wickedness and evil, demanding blood sacrifices and doing, fornication, all kinds of ritualistic stuff that was definitely God was opposed to. This is what they were promoting and doing. God had the one nation of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then left the rest of the peoples to these other angels. This is what we kind of see happening here. Now we're going to move on here to Daniel chapter 3, because Daniel gives some more detail. Now, it wasn't just Israel that understood how this all worked. Even pagan kings and stuff understood how the whole angelic thing went. Okay? And this is King Nebuchadnezzar. We all remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were in that fiery furnace. When they got thrown into that furnace, here's the interesting part. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got thrown in that furnace, but there was a fourth being in that furnace. And the king knew who that being was. That was one of the sons of God. In other words, one of the gods. Essentially, that's what it was. And it basically, he states that here in Daniel chapter 3, verse 23. And I'm just going to read that really quick so we can get an idea of what's going on here. It says, and these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the fiery burning furnace, being shackled. So they were shackled up. They were thrown in there. They should have been literally killed almost instantly. But God miraculously sent one of his council members in there to protect them. Okay, that was one of the council members' jobs. I guess part of the angelic council was to go in there and kind of rescue people and stuff like that at times. And Nebuchadnezzar heard their praising, and he wondered, and he rose up in haste and said to his great men, was it not 3 men that we threw in the midst of the fire being shackled? And they said, King, truly, O king. And the king said, hence I see a fourth man being loose and walking in the midst of the fire, and there is no corruption to them. And the vision of the fourth is likened to Son of God. See, there you go. One of the sons of God, which are an angelic being. Even the pagan kings knew all this. They were the ones that were in the midst of them. And of course, most nations at that time, including King Nebuchadnezzar's nation, was under those gods. They weren't under the Lord God, which was the nation of Israel, because they got the law from God, law of Moses, and they were following the law of Moses. At least they were trying to, at least. And the other nations were just doing, I guess, their gods didn't give them any instructions that much. I guess just doing the pagan rituals and whatnot. That's all they got. So, interesting fact going on here. Okay, now we're going to move on to the book of Job. We're going to give a couple examples of how these angelic council meetings kind of went. And the Job gives a very interesting description of that when at the very beginning, Job chapter 1, when the devil came in the midst of God to one of the council meetings. You know, it's almost like God had regular council meetings with all his angelic beings, and they talked about things. They discussed how things were. Okay, we know the devil, he is the adversary. Maybe that was God created him as an adversary to challenge the people, make them strong. So in other words, I think that originally Satan, the devil, had a certain job that he did. That was part of the angelic. He was part of God's angelic staff, so to speak. But at some point, he went rogue as well, along with some of the other fallen angels, and they went away from God's ways, and they started kind of doing their own thing. Now we're going to read Job, chapter 1.
And it came to pass this day, and behold, the sons of God came to stand before the Lord, and the devil came in the midst of them.
Okay, so did you see kind of how this is all working here? God's up in heaven, and then now the sons of God, which, you know, we already talked about, we know who these guys are, right? We're kind of conversing in their, I guess, whatever, their divine council meeting, however you want to call it, right? And the devil came in the midst of them because he was among the council members.
Right.
See, once you understand this this way I've explained it, this all kind of makes more sense now. Like, why the devil wasn't he cast out of heaven? No, he was part of the divine council members.
Well, you also said that too, and that's what we're kind of led to believe. We don't quite understand to the level of how they're all involved, but they all have a part to play.
Right, and the devil's part is to be the adversary to God, and to God's people. So that was kind of his, but then he took it too far. His role, he took it too far because then he wanted to usurp God, and this is where he becomes a fallen angel. But up until this point, he's doing his job to challenge God's people, and that essentially to keep us strong. We wonder why we have challenges. We wonder why, we go through trials and struggles in our life. Job kind of, in this council, explains what's going on. God could send trouble on us to make us stronger. This is what he was doing to Job. He didn't want Job to be a weak man. Right. He wanted Job to be strong spiritually. How do you become strong spiritually? You go through trials and struggles in your life. That's what you have to do.
Exactly.
Okay, so here, remember, the sons of God came, and those were the angelic council, and the devil was among them, and now we have a conversation. And we're going to learn a little bit about how these council meetings kind of work by reading a little bit more in this chapter. Go ahead.
And the Lord said to the devil, "From what place have you come?" And the devil answered to the Lord and said, "Going around the earth and walking about the place at hand under heaven." And the Lord said to him, "Have you been attentive then in your consideration to my attendant Job, that there is none like unto him of the ones upon the earth, a blameless man, a man sincere and upright and fearing God, at a distance from every wicked thing.
Okay, now here's an interesting thing that we want to look at here. Okay, now I wonder how many times this kind of thing comes up. If you become, okay, I'm just putting this out there. I'm not saying, hey, we shouldn't become very righteous and holy, but let's be honest here, okay? You look at this story, and it's very disturbing among those of us who are trying to be righteous and holy among God. We don't want God to brag about us like he did to the devil, saying, hey, look at my servant Job here. I wonder how many of these individuals come up that are like this, that get challenged this way in this divine counsel. That, I'm sure maybe this isn't the first time, but this is an example that Job here, he didn't know what was coming his way, but they sure did in the heavens know what was coming his way, and they had a plan for him. So God was saying, hey, look at my servant Job. Look how wonderful he is, okay? And then, of course, now we see the adversary. That's what the devil means, adversary.
Right.
Or the accuser. So he's now going to, do his part.
Right.
In this divine plan to test Job's faith.
Right.
This is what's going to happen here.
He's there to kick the tires and to see whether or not Job is who God thinks he is.
Okay, now, obviously, we know the devil is ultimately becomes very wicked and evil, trying to kill Jesus Christ and all this other.
Right.
So he goes rogue, obviously, but at this point, we don't know enough about him. I think his plan in the garden was, he was the tester. He was the tempter. All right, let's continue reading.
The devil answered and said, before the Lord, does Job freely fear God? Have you not enclosed him and the things inside his household and the things outside and all the things being to him round about?
Okay, so here we're learning another detail about how things work. If you're one of the Lord's, he will put some divine protection around you. This apparently, the devil's admitting that, hey, I can't really touch this guy because he's a very spiritual man.
Without approval or without God's go ahead.
Right. In other words, God puts hedges of protection around you if you're one of his.
I have to say that scripture has been kind of running through my brain about that he won't give you any more than what you can handle. Okay? I'm thinking what God does is he helps build up our confidence or our capacity to trust him and to weather circumstances. I was just telling you earlier how in our early years of marriage, we didn't really have a whole lot of hiccups. We might have had, but it wasn't until later on, after we'd been married for 20 plus years, or close to 20 years, 18 years, that we had larger, bigger issues crop up. I'm talking about the ones where it's like the loss of a child, serious ones that can and has shaken some people's faith in God.
Closer you get to God, the more protection you have. And that kind of makes sense. Jesus even states, the closer you get to the shepherd, the more protection you have for the shepherd. That's what Jesus kind of describes it the same way, except he's the shepherd and we're the sheep.
Right.
And if you want to stay close to the shepherd, if you want to have the protection of that shepherd. God it basically says the same thing here.
Right.
If the closer Job was to the Lord, the more protection he got. Now he's going to allow Job to go through. He's going to kind of release his protection a little bit. See what Job does. And this is why we get tested here in this world. This is a purpose behind why we're living here, folks. Because this is why bad things happen to us. God is testing us to see if we're going to love him or we're just a fair weather friend.
Well, it's kind of that refiner's fire.
Right.
That's what it is.
But this is part of what the council, the heavenly council, decides. This is what I'm learning here. They decide to challenge and then they do their work here. And this is what's going to happen to Job. We kind of know what's in store for Job because we've read the story. But I'm just pointing out that there's some backstory behind this that we're reading now, understanding what went on behind the scenes in the heavens among the divine council for all this to take place. Go ahead and continue reading there.
And all the things being to him round about, the works of his hands you blessed, and his cattle you made upon the earth. But send your hand and touch all which he has, and assuredly he will rave in your face against you. Then the Lord said to the devil, Behold, all as much as is his I put in your hand, but he himself you shall not touch. And the devil went forth from the Lord.
Okay, so there's rules to this war. You know, again, they agreed. Okay, yeah, you can affect him. You can. So God put him. I hate to say this. God sent him on a mission. God, here I know that people don't like to think about this. God sent the devil on a mission to challenge and test Job's faithfulness. I know we want to think, oh, the devil, he's 100% pure evil and everything. He'll never do God's will. Well, here he was doing God's will. God wanted Job to be tested.
Right.
But he gave him, but they're like to any kind of testing, there's rules. There's limits to how far the wicked devil can go.
Well, and that's it, right? So God uses the devil to enact a certain amount of strain or pressure, you could say, to see if Job is going to be faithful in whatever amount that the devil has on him. And I think that's interesting because we know that you only get stronger in your own physical body when you do things like workout, especially with weights. You build muscle. You also have to eat well, but the idea is if you're not lifting weights, your muscle that you have won't be stronger or won't be able to handle, any other things you have to come at your way. And so the idea that God has to strengthen us in our faith, in our ability mentally, and our focus on what's really important. How does he do that? He does that by the challenges we have to face.
So anyway, this is one meeting, and we know kind of how this all went. Job, passed the test with flying colors. It was pretty tough on him. But then in the next chapter, Job chapter 2, verse 1, it happened again that a day came when the sons of God, we know who they are, the angelic council, came to present themselves before God, before the Lord. And so the Lord was there. He was, in there. And Satan also came among them to present himself to the Lord as well.
Right.
So that again happened in the next chapter. So again, there's these, okay, we got another council meeting, and we're going to update you on the status of what's going on. And of course, we learned that, now you have to let me affect his health. That's kind of what we learned in the second chapter.
Well, right. So he's able to do more, not just the stuff and the belongings of Job, which he did in the previous chapter. This one, he can touch Job's body. He can afflict his body with a testing to see if mentally if he's going to cave or not, physically. What can he handle?
Right.
But all to the point, and the other limit was he couldn't kill him.
Right, he couldn't kill him, and here he can obviously put a bunch of boils on him.
Right.
And then of course he got his wife to start nagging him. That we learn here in the chapter 2.
Okay, she was hurting.
No,
him.
I'm not kidding. The wife was nagging him, man. He said she even stated to curse God and die. Well, I mean, that's what her advice to him.
I love that in that Job chapter 2, and I was reading it years ago, and it's always stuck with me. That when she says that, she's speaking of a place of pain, okay? I'm going to give that to her. I understand. I'm a female. I get, where she's coming from. She lost all her children. But he says to her, and I love it, he says, we take the good from God, why not the bad as well? So here's the thing that he even knew. If the good comes from God, so does the bad. But he knew there is probably a reason for them both.
Now we're going to go to another divine council meeting.
Okay.
See, then that's
so
what
you're
we're
showing. There's different places throughout the Bible of these.
Yeah, and obviously there's I don't know how big these council meetings are, but we get the idea. It says the sons of God came among them, and
with God at the helm.
God was there in the midst of them, and they all kind of they talk about things that are going on. They discuss things that are happening. Here's another one that comes up in First Kings.
Okay.
Now, I'm just bringing these up so we understand a little bit about how things work in the heavenlies. Okay, there's a government up there, and they discuss what's happening down here, and we have these angelic beings that are called sons of God, that they go rogue sometimes, but other times they're doing God's will, even though it seems like they're doing evil things. And here's an example here. We all know the story of Ahab and his evil wife, Jezebel, because they did a lot of wickedness in their lives. Well, it was time for God to say, I'm going to put an end to this Ahab. But he had to figure out a way to get Ahab to do something stupid that was going to get him killed.
Right.
So God, in his angelic council meeting, they hatch a plan to take Ahab out of the picture.
Wow.
This is intense, man. I'm telling you, this is amazing. But this is how God does things. We think that everything is like, oh, it's more of like God's like this dictator that doesn't. God, has his own way of doing things that maybe are a lot different than what we think. Okay, so now we're going to read this story in 1 Kings chapter 22, starting with verse 20. Now, God wanted to get rid of Ahab because of his wickedness and evil. And this is what happens in one of these council meetings about how they're going to do it. He discusses this with his sons of God here and how they're going to deceive Ahab into getting himself killed. Okay, go ahead and read this. This is exciting stuff.
And the Lord said, who shall deceive Ahab, king of Israel, that he shall ascend to Ramoth Gilead, and shall fall there? And this one said thus, and this other one thus.
So there, in other words, they were kind of like, one angel was given, maybe one count was given an idea, another one was given another idea. So they were like hashing out ideas.
I'm going to say they were brainstorming scenarios on which one would be the better option.
Yeah, they were trying to, hey, let's figure out how we can get rid of it, how we get him to fall in battle, see? And how we can do everything. And so, this is what they were doing.
Yeah, was like a board meeting.
Yeah. I mean, see, this is how things work in these angelic councils. The truth is stranger than fiction. I'm just telling you. You don't think this is the way it's going on in heaven, but you're reading it right here in your Bibles.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, let's continue on here.
And a spirit came forth and stood before the Lord, and he said, I will deceive him. And the Lord said to him, in what way? And he said, I shall go forth, and I shall be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he said, you shall deceive, and indeed you will be able. Go forth and do so.
Okay, so did you hear what the plan was? He was going to send God's going to send one of his sons of God to become a lying spirit in the mouth of their prophets. So God was telling their prophets, had somebody tell the prophets a bunch of lies. I'm just telling you, this is how things work. We kind of think to ourselves, wait a minute, why would God authorize an operation like this? God's ways are not like our ways. Right. To us, everything is black and white. That's kind of how we think of everything. God has a plan and purpose behind everything. Sometimes what we think is wrong is actually okay. What we think is right is actually wrong. The way we get confused because we're not in the realm that God's working in.
It's how well is it spinned?
Right.
It's got to be spinned, and it's also how well we receive the lesson, or and what mindset we're hearing it from. See, I think there's so many perspectives to hearing a story. And I have been in the Bible reading throughout my life, and this is one of my first, seeing this is making more sense, but I might not have caught this detail early on. And that's what's so amazing about your walk and your faith in the Lord, is that you're learning new things all the time, because either you're mature enough, or maybe the Holy Spirit kind of helps you to see with new eyes because of the longevity of your life, that you're starting to understand the concepts that in your younger years might not have been so obvious.
Okay, now the last verse, it kind of clinches it for you that, yeah, God told this spirit, this angelic spirit, yeah, okay, you go tell all their prophets, go lie to all their prophets, so they think they're getting a message from the Lord about what to happen, and it all turns out to be a lie.
Right.
This is pretty intense and insane if you think about it. Now, we can trust our Bibles because our Bibles are written by God's people, and it's not designed to be a lying spirit. But here, we get this idea that, no, God here, to get rid of evil, will send lying spirits in the midst of them, just like he did with Pharaoh, hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Right.
In Egypt, the plan was, I'm going to actually harden his heart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make it so that he will have no choice but to keep going through his wickedness. See, this is how God works sometimes. It doesn't work the way that we think. We think, oh, wait a minute, lying, that would always be wrong. It's wrong to always tell a lie and everything else. I mean, we know with the Ten Commandments, right?
Right.
Bearing false witness is a sin, right? Well, I'm just saying, God has a way and plan that's different than our way. And in verse 23, go ahead and read that last verse
Okay.
there. This is God's authorized plan.
And behold, all right, and now, behold, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of these your prophets, and the Lord spoke against you bad things.
So again, this was an authorized mission from heaven by God to lie to these prophets.
Right.
Now, all I'm saying here is that, we don't always understand God's ways, but this is what's going on in the angelic councils and stuff like that. Obviously, God has a way of taking out people and doing stuff like this. Now, would he have done this if somebody was doing his will? No, because Ahab was living an evil and wicked life, and so God was ready to cut his life short. And so this is what was going on.
Well, I think
here.
it's because he wouldn't have received the truth or received good. That's probably what it was. He knew that he would probably more or less receive the lies because it's what his itching ears wanted to hear, kind of that idea. It's what he wanted to hear, so he just gave him what he wanted to hear.
Okay, now we're going to go on, and I got some good news for everybody. Okay, see, we know what happened to all these wicked and evil sons of God.
Right.
They didn't do so well. Okay, they went rogue. They decided to abandon ship, so to speak, and try to set up their own kingdoms.
Right.
See, that's what the kingdoms of this world
Yes.
are essentially competitors to New Earth, the kingdom of God.
Right.
But see, God, of course, got the biggest kingdom and everything else, but they're trying to set up their own.
But they can't compare to God's.
Never, because God's righteousness and holiness is superior. But what did he do? There's a war in heaven.
Right.
That's one thing I've learned about is that there is this war in heaven. We're going to discuss this here in future shows here. But what God did was he replaced all his rogue council members. And guess who those new council members are going to be?
Those who've been tested by the fire.
They're going to be us, folks.
Mm-hmm.
They're the resurrected righteous. So what he did was he fired all his council that were in opposition to him, and he replaced them with those of us who are righteous and holy. And I can prove this biblically. Okay, we're going to go to Luke chapter 2 or 20. Luke 20 has an example of what's going to happen after the resurrection. And this proves that these angels of God here are actually sons of God. And that we essentially are going to be part of that angelic council one day. If we hold fast. See, part of the reason I'm learning now, why are they trying so hard to get us to fall away from the Lord? Because we're taking their spots, folks. See, the wicked forces of this world know that who's going to take their spots in the angelic council. And that's going to be those of us that are righteous. That's why they're trying so hard to dethrone us. That's why they're trying to get rid of us. That's why they're trying to test us and get us off our spiritual game. But it's not going to work because we know their plans. Luke chapter 20, verses 34. Now, Jesus is basically telling the Sadducees about the resurrection from the dead. And we get a little bit of detail here about what our resurrected state's going to be like in verse 34. Go ahead and read that one.
And answering, Jesus said to them, the sons of this world marry and are given in marriage, but they who shall be counted worthy to obtain that world and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage.
Okay, so he's trying to say, everybody in this world, and that's the world we're in right now.
Right.
We marry and are given in marriage and all that kind of stuff, and that's what we do here. But in the next age, the next world, okay, this is new earth. This is the one we're going to, folks.
Right.
In the next world, the next earth, guess what? We're not going to be marrying and giving in marriage. And he's going to explain why we're not going to be marrying and giving in marriage. Because we're going to have a huge job that we're going to be taking over. Okay? Essentially, we're taking the spots of all these wicked council members that were part of the angelic council. Guess what? That's going to be us now. We're going to learn. This is going to be us now. Go ahead and keep reading there.
Nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are the sons of God, being the sons of the resurrection.
Okay, so we're equal to the angels. Angels, they're sons of God. We are going to be equal to the angels. We're going to be sons of God too, being sons of the resurrected. So this is really great news for us because we're essentially taking their spots on the council.
Well, I'm thinking, talk about the A team and the B team. Honestly, though, you can look at it and say, all right, so they failed to perform or to fulfill what God has designed them to do. So he's going to replace them with those who are proven and have proven themselves faithful. And so that's kind of, maybe that was his design, was I'm going to create these beings and let them serve me, and whoever is faithful in their service to me will get to have this place in the eternity.
Well, see, yeah, angels have free will, and just like humans have free will, and some of them we learned later on, it was a third of the angels, they chose to go against the Lord. They didn't want to follow the Lord. And get this, they saw God, they were there, imagine being in a situation where you're literally, and that's what happened with Garden of Eden. They were in their version of paradise. I mean, heaven has to be fairly good, I would guess, But we don't know what heaven looks like because we're never going there. But the angels, they're up there, and they're obviously in God's midst. They know who God is. God created them. God, made the whole world and everything. And they were actually a part of our creation as well. Mm-hmm. That's one thing you learn about. But a lot of them, that wasn't enough. They needed more than that. And so they went for power. They wanted to take over the most high spot, and they wanted to become their own most high. Mm-hmm. But it didn't work because they ended up getting dethroned, and basically their punishment was thrown to earth. And that's where they're at now. And that's why this world's getting mucked up so much, because we have all these fallen angels down here mucking everything up. Mm-hmm. And so, but here we see that we're going to become, at the resurrection, those who are worthy, that's us, who are righteous, are going, that he mentions that you got to be worthy, and we're going to be equal to the angels. In other words, and we're going to be sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. So we're taking over the council spot.
Right.
And so God's loading up the council with all his righteous people that are backing him, which makes sense because God's a creator and 100% pure, righteous, and holy, and he doesn't want all these rogue members on there mucking everything up like they've been doing.
Well, I would like to say it's more like proven soldiers.
Right.
If you see someone fulfilling the duties that are assigned to them and they're doing it without complaining, they're faithful, you're going to want to elevate them to a higher status because they've been proven. I was thinking about the disciples, and even Jesus had a rogue member. Judas was one of the 12, and he decided, I'm going to betray him. I was thinking in all of this and listening to this, I was thinking, so he betrayed Jesus. He was paid. He could have at any point, asked for forgiveness, changed his ways, and, come back to the fold, and all that. But I'm wondering, maybe he was deceived. He heard a voice, or he listened to some other, and he decided, no, I'm just going to take my life. I mean, he didn't have to end his life. He didn't have to listen to that and do that. But I think so often, because that's been a huge thing in our society the last 4 or 5 years, where suicide rates have gone just accentuated, because that seems like that's the voice that people are hearing when there's no hope, or they're depressed or whatever. And I'm wondering if that's kind of where Judas was at. And if God allowed, I don't know.
Well, Judas was part originally of God's plan, because God, I kind of knew what was going to happen here.
That Satan entered him?
Yeah, Satan entered Judas.
Yeah.
But before that happened, I think, Christ picked him and knew ahead, even before that happened, that what he was going to do, because it was all part of God's plan to redeem mankind.
Exactly.
He needed to have his son shed his blood on the cross as the sacrificial lamb for that all to take place. And of course, it all worked perfectly according to God's plan. God's plan is much more sophisticated than just, I'm going to send a bunch of lying spirits into their prophets. God's plan sometimes takes thousands of years. See, God's thinking way ahead of anybody else. Yeah. See, those, we think so limited in our ideas. God's plan is much more. And, of course, he might have an idea of what he wants. And maybe he already knew this is what we're going to do with the lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets. But the whole point is that God already wants us to work with him and come up with ideas. And, he wanted him to brainstorm, and he wanted him to come. And so I wonder if maybe in our eternity, this is what's going to happen to us.
Well, it's like if someone's already on the course of destruction, he's going to let that course play out. And that's kind of what he did. It's kind of, I see that even with Pharaoh, and, if they are already going down that ulterior road, he's going to let them have the taste of their fruit, so to speak. But I think the interesting thing is nothing is a surprise to God. Nothing is a shock. He knows it all. And what the beautiful thing that we've been learning through all our episodes that we've been doing is that even when, we get saddened that someone's life didn't go the way we were hoping it to go, and, heard tragedy of suicide, or, people being addicted to drugs or whatever, and they choose a different path than what even the parents want or whatever, that's not a surprise to God, because he's going to resurrect everyone. So we've learned that. So it's almost as if God has all the time, and he does give second chances, but to what degree you're going to have to fulfill that time frame. I just think, I see overall, God is such a loving God. And that's why I call him Father. He is a loving Father, because he wants what's best for everyone. But not everyone is going to choose what's best. So he's going to let it play out to whatever they choose.
When Jesus came, when he showed up here, and he gave his, really the very first sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, the very first sermon he gave to the people that we read in the Bible, Matthew chapter 5, one of the first promises that he actually makes to the people, blessed are the peacemakers.
Right.
For they shall be called what?
The sons of God.
They knew what that meant.
Yeah.
I'm sure they knew. They already knew. They knew everything that I already told you on these last two shows. They understood all that. They understood what that meant. You're a peacemaker. You're going to be a son of God. But they knew that means that's a promotion. We're going to get promoted up from where we're at now. In the end, on judgment, we're going to get promoted up to be part of the angelic council.
That's so beautiful.
That's what the Bible promises, folks. I'm just saying, but the satanic forces, they know that we're replacing them. So that's why they're trying so hard right now to corrupt everybody.
Talk about the redemption process. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever been promoted that high before.
Next week, we're going to go over the downfall of the angels. the actual war in heaven. When that happens, and this is going to be a little bit of an apology tour here, because I originally thought the war in heaven began, before Garden of Eden. No, now I think I know exactly when it happened. And we're going to discuss that next time. So I'm learning new things as I'm going along here. But we're going to go over when the war of heaven happened and how it affects our lives. And this is super interesting stuff.
So is that when all heaven broke loose?
Yeah, wars are inevitable, and there was a war in heaven, and essentially there was a shattering of the council.
Yeah.
This is one thing you understand. Remember, they're all in this council members, but at some point there was a breakaway of the council.
Well, and God has veto power, so there's nothing that anyone can do that God can't, call it. No, he gets the shots. He gets all the final say.
So next week we'll go over that one, because we live in a very dark, deceptive age. We must be vigilant. We must be manly. We must be fortified, standing firm in the faith, doing everything out of love, not only because it's biblical,
but because it glorifies God.
Join or contact us at satanslowseason.org. This is a non-copyrighted Living in Satan's Low Season production.